What's up YouTube, Saf here on Super Saf TV, and in this video I'm going to be comparing the specs of the new HTC One to the Sony Xperia Z. Now these two handsets are the latest offerings on the Android lineup and both boasting some serious specs. Now with the Samsung Galaxy S4 just around the corner, I mean things are really heating up and all these different handsets, and it can get a bit confusing what the key differences are between these big players. So I thought in my usual style, let me compare the specs of these two and give you guys a better idea of the differences. So let's get straight into it. Looking at dimensions initially, the Sony Xperia Z is slightly thinner than the HTC One, just about 1.4 millimeters, whereas the HTC One is slightly smaller in terms of the height and the width. Now obviously this is because the HTC One has a slightly smaller screen, a 4.7-inch screen, whereas the Sony Xperia Z has a full 5-inch screen. Now obviously, you know, the never-ending debate of how big is too big on a smartphone. Personally, I use the Samsung Galaxy S3, which is about 4.8 inches, and I think it's absolutely fine. I think 5 inches is slightly going a bit too much on the bigger side, but some people prefer that larger screen size for things like videos. Now obviously videos are going to look great on both of these devices, and that's because the resolution, you've got 1080p resolution on both of these screens, which is absolutely amazing. I mean, you're going to be getting some really nice video on here. They've both got a resolution of 1920 by 1080. And in terms of pixels per inch, the pixel density PPI, the HTC One has 468 PPI, whereas the Sony Xperia Z has 441. Now, obviously, at that rate, you know, these minor differences in terms of PPI are not going to be a huge deal. Obviously, the HTC One is a smaller screen, so you've got the same resolution, but it's packed in a smaller screen, so you've got more pixels packed in that space, so that's why it's got the higher PPI. But at that level, I don't think you're going to be, unless you're looking for it, you're not going to be able to notice a huge deal of difference in terms of the detail. Now, looking at the weight of these devices, the HTC One is 143 grams, the Sony Xperia Z 146 grams. Again, not a huge deal of difference in terms of the weight, just 3 grams between them. And moving on to the build, now the HTC One is a curved aluminium unibody, whereas the Xperia Z is an anti-shatter durable glass. Now that's front and back, so it's got glass. Now both of these are going to feel quite nice and premium, unlike, you know, a lot of people were complaining about the S3 being a bit plasticky, but these are using some premium materials on here. And obviously the key point about the Sony Xperia Z is the fact that it is water resistant, let me say, and dustproof as well. Now this is obviously a unique selling point of this device, and it's water resistant up to 1 meter and 30 minutes, which is very impressive for a smartphone of this specification. So I mean, I'm sure everyone knows somebody or themselves have spilt water on a phone, and it's just been a nightmare. Whereas with this one, I've actually heard of some people dropping it in the toilet, so obviously with the Sony Xperia Z, this shouldn't be an issue, so very useful there. Looking at the speed and the processor, the HTC One has a quad-core 1.7 GHz Quake processor, whereas the Sony Xperia Z has a quad-core 1.5 GHz Quake processor. So a slight difference. Obviously the HTC One has a slight edge in terms of the processor speed. Internal memory, the HTC One has 32 and 64 gigabyte variants, whereas the Sony Xperia Z has just the 16 gigabyte version. Now, having said that, the Xperia Z does have a micro SD card slot, and it's up to 32 gigabytes, whereas the HTC One, you're sort of stuck with what you've got. So obviously that's the advantage that's going to be there. You can expand it. Yeah, fair enough. It's going to be a slightly smaller storage size on the actual device, but you can expand that only up to 32 gigabytes. I'm not sure why not up to 64 gigabytes like the S3 and other phones, but only up to 32 gigabytes. But then again, I think it just sort of comes down to your personal preference. In terms of the RAM, both have 2 gigabytes of RAM, so you know, multitasking is going to be really nice on these handsets. 2 gigabytes, sort of traditional, sort of standard now, so you're going to be able to run lots of applications at the same time. In terms of the camera, the HTC One has a 4 megapixel ultra pixel camera. The Sony Xperia Z has a 13.1 megapixel camera. Now obviously pixels don't mean everything. Megapixels just mean how large the image is and you might have a very large image, but if it's not sharp and clear, then it's not really, what's the point of having such a large image? Now obviously this is one of the things that HTC are really boasting about, is the ultra pixel camera. Now it has a third size sensor. Just to give you a bit of background, a DSLR camera, when those professional ones, entry level, will have a 2/3 sensor. A full frame, which is what professionals use, will have a full frame sensor. So this is a third, which is very, very impressive on a mobile phone. And what that means is it's going to capture much more light. HTC are saying that it's going to give you 300% more light it's going to let in to the lens than lots of the other devices. So low light photography should be really, really good with this. It also has HTC Zoe. It's a feature on the phone which captures 20 photos and a 3-second video with one click. So you're going to have a very live gallery, and you can sort of go through all the images and pick which image you want. So quite impressive there as well. In terms of video, the HTC One 1080p at 30 frames a second. Same thing on the Sony Xperia Z, and both do HDR video as well, which is quite interesting. I really want to try this out. HDR video, high dynamic range video. Usually you've got it in images on a lot of phone, but on video this is going to be really, really cool, because you're going to get some really sharp images, and where you've got some backlight in some videos, it's going to be really good in terms of getting out the other tones in that image. So it's not going to be like complete silhouette sometimes. So that's going to be really interesting to see. Front facing camera, the HTC One has a 2.1 megapixel camera. The Sony Xperia has a 2.2 megapixel camera. Now both of these are capable of filming at 1080p at 30 frames a second. Now this is really, really good. Traditionally most of the Android smartphones, most of the smartphones out there will have a 720p front facing camera. Now personally I've had an issue with this, because when I'm vlogging and things like that, when I'm using the phone and I'm switching between the camera, then when it comes to editing, I have to downgrade the 1080p footage to 720p on my current S3. However, with this is going to be really, really useful, because you can use the front and the back, and they're both going to be at 1080p. So very good on both devices. In terms of the operating system, both have the Android Jelly Bean 4.1.2 on both devices, and that's going to come out of the box, and obviously that's going to be upgradable to 4.2, but it depends on when Sony and when HTC configure the updates with their own skins. Now the Sony Xperia skin doesn't actually have an official name. I don't believe anyway. HTC, obviously HTC Sense, which is quite popular and has been on all previous HTC devices, and it's also got HTC Blink Feed. Now this is a new feature where you can have tiles on your screen, and you can sort of configure social media updates, news, etc. You can really customize those, and they're going to be live widgets on there. So that's quite a cool new feature on the HTC Sense UI as well. So that's something to look out for. In terms of battery, the HTC One has a lithium polymer 2300 milliamp battery, whereas the Sony Xperia Z has a lithium ion 2330 milliamp battery. Now one thing to note is neither of these are removable, so this seems to be sort of a trend these days. I know the iPhone used to have it before now, lot more Android phones, and the Nexus 4 had it as well, where you cannot remove the battery out of the handset. So that seems to be something consistent, so you're not going to be able to get a replacement battery that easily for these devices. So one thing to bear in mind there as well. The Sony Xperia Z, however, does have a battery stamina mode. Now these are some of the other features I just thought I'd cover as well. Battery stamina mode apparently is going to give you up to 4 times more standby. So when you've not using the phone and the screen is off, then it's going to sort of put the other apps, like sort of close off some of the other apps and start them up again when when you're using the device. So it's going to try to save you battery. So that's one of the features on the Sony Xperia Z. However, the HTC One, in terms of other features, it has dual frontal stereo speakers with built-in amplifiers. So they've really concentrated on the sound. Obviously with some of the other devices as well, they've really concentrated on the sound, but here you're going to have HTC boom sound is what they're calling it. Sharper, richer and louder sound that you're going to get on. Then obviously if you've got stereo speakers, both 2 stereo speakers at the front, you're going to be getting some better sound when you're watching videos and things off the handset directly. Some people just use headphones, but obviously this is going to give you some nice sound on there. Okay, finally moving on to price now. Obviously depending on your carrier, etc., and the contracts you go on, that's going to be completely different, but I'm just looking at the handset only costs. Now roughly speaking, they're both very similar, between £500 to £550 in UK, and in the US between $700 and $750. So the sort of premium pricing there that you're going to be getting. But again, for these handsets, that is pretty reasonable, because these are some serious handsets here. Now those were the key differences between these two. I think they're absolutely exceptional. What are your views on these devices? Which one would you go for? do drop me a comment below and let me know. Now obviously a lot of people are excited about the Android lineup, but the big question is about the Galaxy S4. What would that be offering? And obviously HTC and Sony have really tried to capture the share of the market this time with these handsets, and they are looking very impressive. But obviously last year, 2012, was dominated by the Samsung Galaxy S3, and the others did not really live up to the, I mean, obviously Samsung, brilliant at their marketing, and I mean, I've been using the S3, absolutely exceptional device, so it still remains to see what the S4 will have to offer. And personally, before making a decision on any new handset, I'm going to be waiting for the announcement of the S4 to really see what Samsung have got up their sleeve, so it'll be interesting to see. Now obviously in the usual style, if I do get hold of either of these devices, I'll be posting a full review on the channel, and I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button, it really does help me out. And why not subscribe to the channel? I'm going to be having plenty more videos coming up on here, so do hit the subscribe button right here. Thank you for watching. This is Saf on Super Saf TV, and I'll see you next time.